As I've been writing my book on RTS design, it's meant having to replay a lot of the classics. We've done Age of Empires, we're going to be doing Company of Heroes, Rise of Nations, and I've also been going through and replaying the Command and Conquers. And it's been a very interesting time capsule. But I've been dreading talking more about where the genre is today. Because as fans know, it's kind of gone very quiet for the most part in terms of the mainstream. And while strategy as a whole is kind of indicative of this, in order to make this video seem somewhat coherent, we're going to be focusing on kind of this RTS reckoning that I think needs to happen for the genre, and it's going to hopefully not cause too much trouble down the comments. Every game genre has had a very interesting history of what caused it to blow up, issues that may have caused it to decline or almost die, and a reinvention for the modern audience. And this can be seen in many different examples, from how platformers really evolved into either more on the hyper, super challenging side of stuff like M++, Super Meat Boy, upcoming Clown Meat, to the likes of more story-driven or more like general platforming, Shovel Knights, Metroidvanias, and all that. Shooters, of course, had a huge boom, pun intended, with the growth and return of boomer shooters, single-player driven shooters, from the likes of Doom, Dusk, Ultra Kill, lots of kills in that one. And who can't forget about roguelikes that have had what are we up to, 27 different reinventions over the 2010s, from Slay the Spire, Monster Train, Darkest Dungeon, FTL, Spelunky, Bind of Eyes. I could just keep naming them for another minute or two. But there's one genre, or I should say one massive genre, that has yet to have this kind of cold water over the face moment, and that is strategy. And as I said, in order to keep things from turning this into a 40-minute to an hour-long video, I'm going to focus more on real-time strategy, and we'll talk about turn-based and that kind of strategy in another piece. The RTS genre has had a few periods of reinvention and change. The ones that we all know of is kind of where the genre has kind of segmented itself into in the modern market right now. So, on one end of the spectrum, we have the very micro-heavy or micro-intensive RTSs. The Company of Heroes, the whole MOBA style, and that particular era. And then over here, we have kind of this keeping the torch alive for the super macro. So this is where you're not controlling just one army or 100 units. This is when it gets very, very big. The battlefield is massive. So this is, of course, grand strategy style, the whole Steel Division, Total War, Planetary Annihilation, that particular style of RTS. And both have their respective markets. I'm sure a few of you watching this love one or the other, maybe you love them both. But it still doesn't get to the point that real-time strategy, and like I said, as strategy as a whole, has yet to have this moment of how do we bring this to the modern market? How do we change things so that we're not just appealing to the same person who played this game 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago? Wow, it's been a really long time, hasn't it? When we talk about these kinds of points, the number one comment that gets brought up, especially by fans, is who cares? I like these games. My friends like these games. The problem is, of course, on you. You either hate the games, you're not good at the games, you're not a true fan, etc., etc. But you see, the point about this, and kind of our major discussion for the video, is that strategy as a whole has been kind of floundering for the past, well, we're going to be going on 15 years by the end of this year. That the 2010s was not a really good period for strategy and real-time strategy games. And again, a few of you are going to immediately counter me and say, well, what about Planetary Annihilation? What about Company of Heroes 3, Age of Empires 4, the upcoming Homeworld 3. And I've tried a few of those games and they were good, but they're not lighting the market on fire. They're not giving it the same kind of spark that the likes of Doom Eternal did, that Slay the Spire or FTL, or all the Metroidvanias that we've covered. And the closest parallel I can think of having this kind of identity crisis or market crisis as a genre would be the adventure game genre. That again, few of you watching this, you probably play and love your adventure games. You probably have played all the Wadget Eye games, the Dream Machine. You're probably really excited about, Harold Halibut that's coming out soon. But adventure as a whole has been shrinking quite rapidly over the past 10 years. And there was this very dark period where, kind of like after Telltale closed for the first time, a lot of people just felt that the adventure genre is dead. We pack it up, close shop, put the lock on the door, it's done. We're never going to have another adventure game ever again. But as a lot of us know who cover indie games, the adventure genre has been alive and well among the hardcore fans in the indie market for, well, again, the last 14, 15 years now. But that did not translate into the same kind of mainstreaming success that we've seen other genres have had. I mean, speaking about roguelikes right now, they just had yet another major reinvention or mainstream explosion with Balatrio. And now we're going to be entering the gambling arc of roguelike design, probably for the next year or two. And the point is that it's these kinds of spikes in the genre that allow it to grow and evolve, where you can say, yes, we can do other things with a roguelike, with a platformer, with a shooter, and there are going to be people wanting to check that out. There are people who want to look at something that is different in some way, shape, or form. But strategy has not had this moment. Again, when we look at strategy games today, they are either very micro-focus or they're very macro-focus. But when is the last time that a strategy game as a new property, again, we're not talking about Steel Division 2, Age of Empires 4, Homeworld 3, a brand new original RTS IP has had the same kind of explosion in terms of pop culture and mainstreaming that we've seen from, let's say, Five Nights at Freddy's, Balatrio, Hollow Knight. Pick any major game that has kind of brought a genre to a new market over the past 14 years. And like I said, we really haven't seen this. Even to the strategy genre as a whole. Again, we're trying to focus more on RTS here. But RTSs have always had this issue in terms of who is the market for it. Because it's always existed in this kind of tug of war between two different groups of people. You have the person who likes the competitive esports angle. Again, this is the group that really gravitated towards the rise of MOBAs and micro-style RTSs. But they also like the grand macro intensive ones. Your, again, Steel Divisions, Planetary Annihilations, where you have to be managing not just one unit, but hundreds on a map. You could be battling across galaxies and planets and universes. Then there's the group that likes more of the story-driven, kind of almost like strategy as a puzzle style. This is people who play the campaigns of StarCraft, Command & Conquer, Company of Heroes, and the likes, where they want to be challenged in a way that's not about, can you read the meta for any given time? Can you have your proper build order optimized down to 25 seconds exactly? Or you will not be able to compete with the enemy's rush that's going to be coming at 28.5 seconds. And people have had this back and forth. And again, this is where this kind of reckoning of a genre comes in. that you're going to have this battle between the traditional fans of the genre and the new fans, or the people who want to see something different. Again, roguelikes are probably one of the biggest examples of this, as the argument is still raging on today as to what is a roguelike right now. Is it something like a Spelunky, Binding of Isaac, a Slay the Spire? Do we call it more of a traditional roguelike, like a Shiren the Wanderer or a Mystery Dungeon, NetHack, and all those? And it oftentimes ends up with a somewhat divided fan base of people who prefer the traditional style versus those who prefer the new and experimental. And with strategy, attempts at trying to be experimental, attempts at trying to do something different, have always been leaving people just not interested, or should I say the hardcore fans not interested in it. And we've yet to see a strategy game that has had, again, like the same level of mainstreaming appeal and so on as all the other games that we've mentioned. To bring this back to the adventure genre as a quick example, the adventure games have had this period where it has really segmented into two distinct groups. That if you want the incredibly story-driven, very narrative-focused, and you don't care about puzzles, we have all these visual novel-style games, the Doki Doki Literature Clubs, many romance-style visual novels. And if you want a puzzle game, if you want the mystery box wrapped in an enigma, hidden inside a riddle, combined with a limerick, there are those games as well. And we've seen games that have gone in between or have pushed to one of those two extremes. And even with that, the adventure genre is still struggling to get to mainstream. The funny thing, again, or should I say, I should put some air quotes in front of funny, is that, again, Balatrio at this point is maybe like a month or a little bit more than a month old at this point in terms of being released publicly. It has had more sales than probably all the major, or shall I say, major point-and-click adventure games released over the past 5 years. There's yet another depressing thought for you for 2024. And it's this kind of experimentation, this type of growth and changing that is healthy for genres, because it allows the door to be open for people to look at new ways of integrating elements into them. The shooter genre, like I said a few minutes ago, it has been this kind of rise of the boomer shooter. But now we're seeing more people experiment with having more platforming challenges in FPS play, other ways of doing stuff in first person that's not just super gory single player shooter or super rapid competitive, esports level shooter. Because the extremes of a genre will always have their hardcore fans. No matter what I say here today, there are going to be a huge fan support or a huge audience of someone who plays Counter-Strike, League of Legends, pick anything else that we've talked about. But when a genre becomes only locked to 2 or 3 major successes, and again, when we say major, it's still very niche focus, that genre just kind of fades away for everyone else. Now, again, sometimes this is done by the publisher's insistence, like we saw with horror in the mid-2010s, when everyone was just like, well, horror doesn't work anymore, let's turn it all into action horror and just copy Call of Duty. I'm sure that turned out well, as we all know. And when I look at what I want to see from RTSs and strategy as a whole, is this idea of how do we improve this and remove the issues, the pain points, the UI UX problems that have plagued this genre for now quite a long time. It'll be, I think, the 20th anniversary of Command & Conquer next year. And I'm going to say something here that is going to cause every strategy fan and every strategy designer to fall over their or fall off their chair. So if you're watching this right now, make sure that you're properly in your chair. If you're standing, make sure to sit down. I don't want you to faint when you hear this. What I want to see is someone to make like a Stellaris, a Command and Conquer, a StarCraft, but I want to see the approachability and the UI UX of something like Mario plus Rabbids, or Mario Cross Rabbids, the Kingdom Battle games, or even something like Persona Tactia. This idea that if you're making a strategy game, you should put as much emphasis on the aesthetics, on making the UI UX presentable and clean, as you do on the unit design, on the map design, on the balancing. I don't want to play another strategy game, RTS, or turn-based withstanding, that I open it up and I am just giving 20 screens worth of stats and numbers and different terminologies I need to look up on another screen. And that anytime I want to make a move, I need to properly take out my calculator and coordinate exactly where my damage is going to be, because the game's not going to give me that information. So I want to interrupt myself here for a quick second, because I know someone's going to comment saying, why are you trying to force us to make suggestions about real-time strategy design if you never thought of it yourself? But I did a very long time ago. When the Wii was first announced, and this whole idea of a gesture and kind of pointer-driven interface for a console, I started thinking of game ideas of how it could fit, or game ideas that could fit on it. And I came with this idea for a real-time strategy game that would use the gesture and point-based system for managing units and kind of removing a lot of the more, I guess, technical or more cumbersome elements of real-time strategy, where you would use like a toy box and you would have like different toys put into it which would represent your units. So it was combining both real-time strategy, console, and the whole idea of like deck building and customization into one specific game. And I think it could still work today, so if anyone wants to work on that one with me, then I am definitely right here for it. As I said earlier, right now, a few of the hardcore fans are probably responding down below, well, that doesn't sound like a strategy game to me. You're not a strategy fan if you want this kind of stuff in your game. But therein lies the problem. That if you just cater to the hardcore, that is the only market that you are actively caring about, your game is not going to survive. Because guess what? All the hardcore fans have their game already. It's whatever is the biggest example of X right now. And strategy and RTS strategy, or real-time strategy, needs to have this kind of a slap across the face moment, because the genre has not really seen any new life in the past 5 years. And again, before any of you comment down below, I'm not counting Company of Heroes, Age of Empire, Dawn of War, Steel Division in this category. I'm talking about a new IP in the genre. And there have been new IPs in strategy over the past 14 years. How many of you remember all of them who you aren't a hardcore fan of them? So to wrap up our depressing topic for today, genres, in order to remain relevant, need to grow. They need to change into what the market is looking like today. RPGs have had a massive amount of room to change and grow. Again, hardcore fans are going to be debating and raging over the Final Fantasy VII remakes, Final Fantasy, whatever one we're up to at this point, that went more action-focused. ARPGs have been seeing a very slow-moving change, with the likes of Last Epoch, Diablo 4, Problems Notwithstanding, Path of Exile 2. There has to be this moment where a genre either has room to breathe and do something else differently, or it's just going to go quietly into that long night, never to be heard from ever again, other than the very vocal minority screaming, why aren't we getting more games, as we just play the same 3 ones we've done over the past 20 years? So, here's a final question for those of you watching this. Can you prove me wrong? Are there any upcoming real-time strategy games coming out that is set to do something new and different, that has that potential to break out, much like a Slay the Spire, a Balatrio, and that it can exist, not just as an example of an RTS, but as an example of a really great game that can appeal to someone who isn't currently singing I'm a Mechanical Man, or singing about Zergling rushes, or tank rushes, or MOBA, whatever MOBA strategies there are out there. Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to do the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my books wherever they are sold. Visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games.